I don't profess to be an expert in this field. I have endeavoured to consult with a bit of a wider grower audience and some agronomists through the South Coast to get a bit of feedback on the issue. I'd have to say, as a farmer, and I've been in the farming game for 32 years, it's probably one of the least understood inputs, and it probably revolves around the issue that it's an input that may not necessarily be utilised every year, and it probably depends on where you're actually farming, but it's there are a lot of unknowns about fungicides. You have to bear with me, but I'm not used to these PowerPoint programs. Just to give you a rough idea, my experience is basically in growing cereals, oilseeds, as in canola, legumes and peas. We see fungal disease expression in all these irregularly in my growing environment. Now I'm in basically what I call Ag Zone 5, which is a medium rainfall growing environment. I guess from an overall perspective, I'm in an environment where fungal disease does not occur regularly every year. It probably occurs 2 years out of 5 or 3 years out of 5, and we may have to spray post-emergent maybe 1 or 2 years out of 5. If I could categorise West Australian growers, I think this basically would sum it up. The low rainfall areas, fairly low disease pressure, fairly low input production system. The central categorisation occasional, so the growers in that arena will follow the season. They'll be monitoring and they'll spray only when necessary, and I would probably fit into that category. And I guess the third category is basically the coastal strip. It's high rainfall, high input, possibly multiple treatments, and that's certainly come to the fore in the last few years with Bodan, with powdery mildew, and regular monitoring. I was asked to talk about fungicide management, and I just want to make this point very strongly. From a farmer point of view, farmers want agronomic robustness. We don't want to get into a system where we put the crop in the ground and have to follow up with expensive inputs post-seeding. So basically we're looking for a system that gives agronomic robustness and profit. This issue has really come to the fore probably in the last 5 years. We have moved into a high cost production regime, and we have to look at minimising inputs. I guess this particular slide, in my mind, doesn't give you a lot of confidence, because this is the barley disease chart, and as a grower, when you look at that, you really sort of scratch your head a bit and say, well, where is there really any serious robustness? And I guess this particular issue with barley is being played out at the moment because Bodan, in essence, has broken down. It's got to the point where the average grower cannot or will not spray it because it just doesn't stack up economically. And there's sort of a consequence of this which is starting to play out at the moment with a very big move into hindmarsh barley, which has demonstrated it's got quite good disease resistance, but it's not a manufacturing barley. And I do wonder, over the next 2 or 3 years, where we might find ourselves with a situation where if the Kwinana zone has a tight season, traditionally the maltsters or the grain acquirers have moved into the south coast to acquire malting barley. It may just not be there. Simple as that. We work on profit, and we can't afford to play around with varieties that are costing us a lot to grow. I think we've got a couple of breeders in the audience, haven't we? Where's Regis here somewhere? Any other barley breeders in the audience or not? No. This chart here, this is the Esperance Port Zone sowing hectares of Bodan and Hindmarsh since 08-09. Basically with Hindmarsh we've gone from 0 hectares in 08-09 to last year, 12-13, 52,000 hectares. Bodan, you can see the drop off from 11-12 to 12-13, significant. I was told recently by a fairly astute grower north of Esperance who has just recently graded seed that the seed grading contractor indicated that he hadn't graded any Bodan seed at that stage. I can't prophesise, but I mean it's quite possible 70% of the Esperance Port Zone barley may be hindmarsh and some other varieties, minimal varieties. So, you know, that's a direct ramification of a fungicide issue, a fungal management issue. Resistance. While it appears that many of the early generation fungicides have broken down, when you talk to agronomists on the South Coast, they say that they're not necessarily convinced of this, and in some areas some of the earlier cheaper generation fungicides are still working. It's a moving feast. I think from a grower point of view, to be given confidence, we almost need an NVT style fungicide trial mechanism around the state that is really giving valid up-to-date information on fungicide resistance. I know there's some work being done, but I'm not quite sure whether it's got the regional spread to be relevant. Registration. It would appear that perhaps the GRDC and grower groups, in collaboration with other parties, may need to be a bit more proactive in terms of assessing industry needs and in relation to registration of in relation to the registration of new generation fungicides. And I guess this sort of came to the fore in relation to the outcome of the Bodan barley powdery mildew issue, and SEPWA, to their credit, the grower organisation in the Esperance Port Zone were very proactive and pursued the registration of a product which no other party felt that they really wanted to go near. Yeah, but we're being reactive in that context and not proactive, and timing can be of the essence. Disease identification. I hope you don't think I'm being too judgmental here, but it appears with the demise of the more experienced personnel within DAFWA and the variable seasonal expression of fungal diseases, it's quite difficult to find experienced people to make a valid judgment. It's not uncommon for plant physiological outcomes to be diagnosed as disease symptoms. And I hate saying this, but I was talking to a very, very experienced grower at Munglanup in the context of the preparation of this talk, and he said in the same day, not at the same time, but in the same day, he had two of the most experienced agronomists that have dealt with fungicides and fungal disease on the South Coast in the same paddock, and they gave a different view. And that does not still instill confidence in growers. So, you know, there's probably moving forward, I think this is going to become a greater issue, and maybe there's a need for some training in the industry. Risk. Now, there's probably a perception amongst the non-farming fraternity, can't say that word, that growers put a crop in the ground, spray it, all's well and good. If there's a fungal disease, spray it, and you're going to basically bank the money at the other end. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as that, and this was brought home no more directly, I think, in '89, where significant areas were sprayed for rust, stripe rust, leaf rust, and unknowingly there'd been a severe frost a couple of days beforehand and a couple of more severe frosts afterwards, and there was serious money spent for no end. And it comes back to I guess my opening comment that when you've got any production regime where you basically are adding inputs post-emergent, there's a cost and there's also a risk, and if those two don't match up, that can cost the grower dearly. There has to be a robustness initially. Timing. Often disease identification will result in a recommendation to spray ASAP. Now, it's not quite as simple as that, because poor subsequent weather, and on the south coast sometimes you can see poor spraying conditions for up to 10 days or even 2 weeks. Large areas of disease, chemical availability, equipment availability often result in less than optimum timing. Now, I think generally farmers, we're a lot more geared up to spray large areas than we were traditionally, but it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to meet the right timing window. Efficacy, water rates, chemical rates, adjuvants, application weather, disease level, crop stage, canopy density, subsequent weather conditions are just some of the issues that dictate an outcome. You've also got to factor in the potential yield, the cost of the spraying. That's not directly related to efficacy, but you've got to factor that into the equation, and a heap of other issues. Quite often, I think growers err on the side of caution and possibly spray when they may not have to, because they're worried about running the risk of total crop failure, which generally doesn't happen. But we're probably at the point, I think, where we need a practical in-paddock app where all these factors can be plugged in and we can come up with a reasonable sort of recommendation. Right, I think generally disease rotation pressure is increasing. Just to give you an idea, when I started farming in '81, my farming regime was 80% livestock, 20% cropping. It's virtually the opposite now, and we're seeing a lot of farm operations at 100% cropping, and within that cropping regime they are going to, some of them are going to stacked rotation, so that's wheat on wheat, or very tight canola rotations, so wheat canola. I think the disease pressure is slowly ramping up, but obviously it's I guess more, or the expression is more reflective of the actual season. So we've had a run of fairly dry seasons, I guess, generally statewide. It'll be interesting if we got back into a run of very wet seasons, given the cropping regime at the moment, because I think we might all get a bit of a shock. To conclude, I think overall, this is from my perspective, overall farm fungal management policy must be sustainable, primarily from the agronomic and financial perspective. Throwing an expensive late generation fungicide solution continually at a recognised fungal issue is not the answer. You know, the chemical companies can make $1, we might make $1, but it's eroding that dollar value in our back pocket. And if I had to throw a challenge out to the only breeder in the room, thanks for coming, Reg, let's hope that the breeding fraternity will offer a more robust solution in terms of overall variety availability into the future. Thanks, guys.
Andy, one of the comments you made through your talk was you were concerned about the ability of the agronomists who came to your property to distinguish between the disease and some, you know, between diseases. DAFWA has been offering over the last dozen or more years disease ID training for agronomists on an annual basis. Is there a responsibility for agronomists to only provide advice in things they are skilled in, or does it fall to farmers to ensure that the people they employ to give them advice demonstrate their competence in that?
Good question. Look, in this particular case, both parties were experienced. I think the challenge with fungal diseases is that we're not seeing, quite often the disease is not being expressed every year. I mean, some diseases are, But as you move away from the high rainfall arena, the disease spectrum isn't expressed every year. So those that are in those areas aren't necessarily being exposed. There are other plant physiological, can't say this word either, symptoms that can be expressed, and I guess even the talk about mace, the possible breakdown to yellow spot, still a big question mark. So maybe it's part of an ever-evolving feast too, that even experienced people don't know what they're looking at. I haven't got an easy answer to that one. I think training is certainly part of the equation, and I congratulate the department if that's being offered. I guess at the end of the day, agronomists have got to avail themselves of that if they feel that they're inexperienced. But it's not an easy one.